Hey, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today my views on science education. It is something that's very important to me. Science ed, I think, needs to advance a lot more than it currently is, especially in the public education. And I think my ideas are best summarized in an email I sent to someone, so I'm actually going to read that email to you. And the reason I'm posting this video on my blog is because it directly has Christians in it. I directly talk about them and my ideas because a lot of Christians, they're kind of antsy when it comes to science because they automatically think about Darwinism. So let me address everything that I think about science ed. And the main reason I'm doing this is because I actually plan on eventually becoming a science educator, hopefully. Who knows where or when, but hope it all happens. Here goes the letter. As I become more aware of the world, I have become more in awe of all that surrounds me. I find it amazing how even the most minute of organisms correspond with each other, and how ultimately every living creature affects one another in one way or another. Basically, everything on Earth is a domino effect. Not one living thing on Earth is simply simple. They're all complex. All that is simple about them is their beauty, not necessarily by how each living organism looks, but how it functions. All this has become more apparent to me through my science classes in school, but mostly because of my further study on many aspects of life on my own time. Life, by far, is the most interesting thing to study, at least in my opinion. I've only just begun The Creation by E.O. Wilson. To give you an idea what the book is about, allow me to quickly summarize the main point of the book. In the book, E.O. Wilson is writing a letter to a Southern Baptist pastor. He's trying to convince the pastor that scientists and Christians need to put their differences aside and not be warring antagonists. The reason he directly points out people in science and people in the faith is because they are the two most powerful social and political forces. Ultimately, the idea is to solve some of the 21st century's biggest problems as one force rather than two. One of Wilson's largest fears is that half the species of plants and animals on Earth could be gone or fated for early extinction by the end of our present century. A main point that Wilson made in the book was that because Christians do not believe this is their final home, they have this rather passive attitude towards caring about the problems related to biodiversity or the environment here on Earth. I, admittingly, in the past had struggled with this myself, because obviously I do not believe this is my final home. But I agree with Wilson, we should not treat the environment with a careless attitude, but rather approach it with an attitude that we need to make this the best possible place we can for the coming generations. This is a general idea on why I think we should care about the environment, but I have other reasons as well. And this is where my thoughts of science education come into play. Keep in mind, I'm 15 and do not have as much experience in life, so my ideas may seem crazy. I believe that there needs to be adjustments made in science education. Through my experience of taking science classes since elementary school, I've noticed this pattern of what we have been learning in school. It seems to me that science education through the years is very repetitive in public education. All that changes is that we go into more depth on certain topics we've already learned, and maybe we'll learn a few brand new topics. I especially became aware of this when I began taking ag classes in high school, while some of my other friends continue taking science classes that are not in the ag department. Through talking to them, I became very aware of how different their curriculum was from mine. Of course, the classes will vary, but they were continuing their knowledge on things we've already been learning since middle school, while I, on the other hand, was learning about biodiversity, the environment currently, past issues with the environment, etc. Topics the regular science classes had never covered. This gave me the idea that we need to either change state requirements for science classes, curriculum, which would be very difficult, or even better, start science schools. I was thinking, since there are performing arts schools for children of all ages, why wouldn't we begin science schools? Put all the costs starting these schools aside and hear me out. If we started schools that strictly taught science and of course include the other basic subjects at a young age of students, we would in the end prepare students with a better understanding of the world that surrounds them. Instead of teaching science by only expanding what the students have already learned in past years in public schools, why not teach them all that in elementary school and half of middle school? They can begin figuring out their major or career path in the science choice of which they want to prepare food, such as food science, environmental, research, tech ag, as they further their education in middle school and high school. If we implement the importance of biodiversity and other aspects of science in the minds of students at a young age, it will become important to them. It won't be just this typical 10-minute consideration about helping the environment when you see a Save the Trees t-shirt like it is for many my age. It will become a lifestyle. E.O. Wilson explains in his book that people typically only think we can live off of the domesticated plants and animals we eat every day. But he continues to say that people do not expand their knowledge about biodiversity, and therefore do not even realize there are thousands of other species that we could live off as well. This is something that could be taught in schools. There are alternatives for what we eat. Now, in order to make the parents of the students happy, I believe Darwinism and Christianity's views on the beginning of Earth and so on should be both taught in school. It is good to know about both views, and the subjects should both be taught as non-biased as possible. Hopefully the children of the Christian families will have more of a realization that it's still important to take care and try to help life on Earth. It may not be for the same intentions as a non-believer, but as long as they realize it is important and they actually do try to help life on Earth as we know it. It's good to have that happy medium. I think that if these science schools would exist, they should approach a learning style that is both very kinesthetic and hands-on. The more experience outdoors or in the lab, the better prepared these students are for the future careers. I know in my school, we never looked through a microscope until about 8th grade, and that was only a one-time deal until I took Ag Bio in 10th grade. I don't know if this sounds like a prison of constant learning, but it isn't meant to. I would want the schools to most definitely have a positive environment to learn in. I just feel students are taught at an early age about the importance of how things work and become aware of current issues going on that can be solved with science and logical thinking. Things could really look up for the world in many aspects. I know it wouldn't be a simple process to start many of these schools, not just because of finances, but because of general citizens and people in the government. But I think we should become more determined as science enthusiasts to spread the enthusiasm. If the chance ever comes up, I'd like to start a science-based school. If scientists such as E.O. Wilson heard of these schools, I would hope they would invest in them because they are investing in the future of scientists and change that could be made for the better in the environment, research, healthcare, and so on. I know some of this may sound crazy or impossible, but all through history some of the best ideas sounded crazy from the beginning, but in the end became something magnificent. I believe that the reason many students are not interested in the environment or science in general is because they were taught only small parts of science, and most likely parts of science that the teacher was forced to teach and they didn't want to teach. If an enthusiastic teacher does not teach you, how can you be enthusiastic about the topic? I know there are some schools that are similar to this, but I want to see them flourish and become more popular. That was the gist of my ideas about the future of science education. And so, if you have any things you want to share with me, any ideas, that'd be fine. So, hopefully that gives you an idea and makes you think a little bit about the future of science ed. It really is our advancement and the progression that we need to look at for the future, I believe. So, thank you.